They say a mother's womb is the safest place on earth, a sanctuary of warmth and life. But what happens when the life inside you begins to feed on your shadows? What happens when the heartbeat you hear through the ultrasound isn't a human rhythm, but a rhythmic scraping of bone against bone? My name is Elena, and I am 8 months pregnant with something that stopped being my baby weeks ago. If you are listening to this, don't look for me. Just pray you never feel the cold I feel inside. The humidity in the city was stifling, but inside our new apartment, the air felt like the breath of a tomb. My husband, Marcus, called it a spacious, old-world flat with mahogany floors and crown molding, tucked away in a quiet corner of the district. We needed the space for the nursery. We needed a home for the girl we were expecting in late October. For the first 6 months, the pregnancy was a dream. But the moment we crossed the threshold of this house, the dream curdled. It started with a phantom hunger. Most pregnant women crave sweets or pickles. I craved things that made my stomach turn when I regained my senses. I found myself staring at raw meat in the butcher's shop with a salivating intensity that felt predatory. One night, Marcus found me in the kitchen at 3 a.m., my hands stained dark, chewing on a piece of frozen, unthawed steak. He thought it was just a strange hormonal fluke. I knew better. The hunger didn't come from my stomach. It came from lower down. Then came the movements. At 7 months, a baby's kick is a joyous thump. My baby didn't kick. She slithered. I could feel something long and thin, like a spindly finger, tracing the interior of my ribcage from the inside. It wasn't the soft roll of a limb. It felt like a needle dragging across silk. I went to my OB/GYN, Dr. Eris, for a routine checkup. The office was bright and sterile, a sharp contrast to the oppressive gloom of our apartment. As she applied the cold gel to my stomach and moved the transducer, the room went silent. The monitor flickered with the grainy, black and white image of my womb. "Everything looks stable," Dr. Eris whispered, though her brow furrowed. "What is it?" I asked, my heart hammering against my chest. "The fetal position is unusual," she muttered, turning the screen away from me. "And the bone density. Elena, have you been taking your calcium? The skeletal structure is appearing much sharper, much more defined than I'd expect at 32 weeks." She didn't tell me what I saw in that split second before she turned the monitor. I saw a face. Not the rounded, soft profile of an infant, but something with a jagged jawline and empty, cavernous sockets. It looked less like a child and more like a skull wrapped in wet parchment. When we returned home that evening, the house felt heavier. I sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, a room painted a cheerful lavender that now looked like the color of a bruise in the fading light. As I rubbed my belly, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through me. I gasped, pulling up my shirt. Underneath the skin of my distended stomach, a mark was forming. It wasn't a stretch mark. It was a bruise in the shape of a tiny, hand-like print, but the fingers were far too long, and they had too many joints. As I watched, the skin pushed outward, as if the thing inside was trying to claw its way through my navel. "Wait," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, not yet." A low, guttural vibration hummed through my body. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears. It was a sound I felt in my marrow. It sounded like a wet, clicking laugh. That night, Marcus fell into a deep, unnatural sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the temperature in the room drop until my breath misted in the air. The closet door in the nursery, which we always kept shut, creaked open. From the darkness of the hall, I heard a sound that froze my blood, the sound of a woman sobbing. But the sobs were punctuated by the same rhythmic scraping I felt inside my own body. I tried to scream for Marcus, but my throat felt like it was filled with wet sand. I looked down at my stomach. In the moonlight, I saw the silhouette of two small, pointed shapes pressing against my skin from the inside. They weren't hands. They were horns. The morning after the closet door opened on its own, I woke up with a metallic taste in my mouth so thick it felt like I had been chewing on coins. Marcus was already gone for work, leaving a note on the nightstand. "You were snoring loudly. Didn't want to wake you. See you at 6. Love, M." I wasn't snoring. I knew that. I remembered the rhythmic scraping. I remembered the woman sobbing in the hallway. I dragged myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection was a stranger. My long, oval face looked sunken, the skin sallow and gray. But it was the mole under my lip that caught my attention. It looked inflamed, almost as if something underneath it was pulsing. I looked down at my stomach, fearing what I would see. The long-fingered bruises from the night before hadn't faded. They had turned a deep, sickly violet, and they were positioned higher now, right against my ribs. I couldn't stay in the house. The air felt like it was made of static. I decided to visit a local midwife I'd heard about, not a doctor, but an old woman named Mrs. Holloway who lived in the older part of the district. The locals whispered that she knew the old ways of birthing. When I arrived at her small, vine-covered cottage, the smell of burnt sage and damp earth hit me. Mrs. Holloway didn't ask for my name. She just looked at my stomach and turned pale. "You brought it here," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "I need help," I pleaded. "The doctors say it's fine, but I feel like I'm being eaten from the inside." She moved me to a wooden table and pulled up my shirt. As her wrinkled hands touched my skin, she recoiled as if she'd been burned. "This isn't a child of man, Elena. There is a shadow in your blood. This house you moved into, it wasn't empty. It was waiting for a vessel, a womb to host what was evicted long ago." Before I could ask what she meant, the room went ice cold. The jars of herbs on her shelves began to rattle. My stomach began to contort, not a normal contraction, but a violent, jagged shifting. It looked like a bag of snakes was writhing under my skin. "Get out!" Mrs. Holloway suddenly screamed, her eyes snapping toward the corner of the room. "You cannot have her yet." She grabbed a bowl of salt and threw it toward the shadow behind me, but as the salt hit the air, it turned black and fell to the floor like ash. I felt a sharp, searing pain in my abdomen, like a hot wire being drawn across my nerves. I looked down and screamed. A small, bloody tear had appeared near my navel. It wasn't a wound from the outside. It was a puncture from the inside. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I got home, Marcus was there early. He was standing in the nursery, staring at the lavender walls. "Marcus," I whispered, clutching my stomach. He turned around slowly. His eyes looked vacant, his pupils blown wide. "She's hungry, Elena," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She says the meat from the butcher isn't enough anymore. She wants something fresher." He walked toward me, and for the first time in our 5 years of marriage, I felt true, paralyzing fear of the man I loved. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my belly with a hunger that mirrored the one I felt at the butcher's shop. That night, as I lay in bed, too terrified to sleep, I felt a hand on my stomach. It was Marcus's hand. But as he whispered to my womb in a language I didn't recognize, the thing inside responded. A distinct, clear knock came from inside my body. Thump, thump, thump. 3 knocks. The sign of a mockery of the Trinity. I looked at the window reflection and saw not Marcus and me, but 2 shadows, one standing, one lying down, and a third, smaller shadow standing on top of my stomach, its long, spindly limbs reaching for Marcus's throat. The realization that Marcus was no longer himself felt like a cold blade sliding between my ribs. I lay there, frozen, as his hand remained heavy on my stomach. The whispers continued low, rhythmic, and guttural. It wasn't just a language. It was a vibration that seemed to command the very walls of the room to bleed shadows. Every time he spoke a certain syllable, the thing inside me would twitch in a rhythmic, ecstatic frenzy. I could feel its needle-like claws scraping against the underside of my skin, tracing the veins that fed it. I waited until his breathing deepened into a heavy, artificial sleep. I slid out of bed, my joints aching as if I were decades older. My stomach felt unnaturally heavy, pulling at my spine with a weight that shouldn't belong to a 30-week fetus. I needed to see what he had been doing in the nursery. When I pushed the door open, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the scent of baby powder or fresh paint anymore. It was the cloying, sweet stench of rotting lilies and old copper. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting long, distorted shadows across the lavender walls. Marcus had rearranged the room. The crib was no longer in the center. It had been pushed into the corner, surrounded by a circle of what looked like dark, dried salt and crushed eggshells. I approached the crib, my hand trembling as I reached for the railing. Inside, there were no blankets. Instead, the mattress was covered in old, yellowed Polaroid photos. I picked one up, my breath catching in my throat. They were photos of this very house, dated back to the 1970s. In every single one, a woman stood in the background. She was heavily pregnant, her face obscured by a veil of black hair, but her posture was unmistakable. She was clutching her stomach in the exact same way I did when the pain became unbearable. Underneath the photos lay a journal. The handwriting was jagged, the ink fading into the paper. It requires a host of pure intent, the first line read. The child of the void cannot be born of its own accord. It must be invited through the blood of the father and the flesh of the mother. A cold realization washed over me. Marcus hadn't just found a cheap apartment. He had been looking for this place. He had been looking for her. Suddenly, the floorboards behind me creaked. I spun around, clutching the journal to my chest. No one was there, but the air began to thicken, turning into a hazy, gray mist. From the corner of the room, near the ceiling, a pair of long, pale legs dangled from the shadows. They were thin, unnaturally elongated, and covered in a fine layer of grayish hair. I backed away, but my stomach gave a violent, agonizing lurch. I fell to my knees, gasping as the skin of my belly stretched so thin it became translucent. In the dim light, I saw it, a tiny, gray hand with too many knuckles pressed firmly against my skin from the inside, matching the position of my own hand. It wasn't trying to kick, it was trying to hold my hand. Then, a voice whispered from the darkness, a voice that sounded like a distorted version of my own. "Mother, I'm so cold. Let me in all the way." I scrambled toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The rocking chair began to move on its own, faster and faster, the wood splintering under an invisible weight. I looked up at the ceiling, and the legs were gone. Instead, the woman from the photos was there, crouching in the corner like an insect, her black hair trailing down to the floor. Her eyes were gone, replaced by the same hollow, cavernous sockets I had seen on the ultrasound. She pointed a skeletal finger at my womb and let out a shriek that shattered the glass of the nursery windows. The shriek of the eyeless woman echoed through the nursery, vibrating deep within my skull. As the glass shards settled into the carpet, the silence that followed was even more terrifying. The woman on the ceiling didn't move. She simply hung there, her black hair swaying like seaweed in an invisible current. My stomach felt like it was filled with boiling lead. I crawled toward the door, my fingernails digging into the mahogany floorboards. "Marcus! Marcus, help me!" I screamed, but the house seemed to swallow my voice. The hallway outside was an abyss of shifting smoke. I made it to the master bedroom, gasping for air. Marcus was sitting upright in bed. He wasn't asleep. He was staring at the wall, his chest heaving. In the pale moonlight, I saw that his skin was beginning to peel in long, thin strips, revealing a dark, pulsing tissue underneath. "Marcus, we have to leave." "No." I grabbed his arm, but his skin felt like wet paper, tearing under my touch. He turned his head toward me with a slow, mechanical click. "She says it's almost time, Elena. The moon is in the right house. The blood is ready." "Who is she?" I sobbed, backing away. "The one who was denied," he whispered. "The one they tried to cut out of the world. She's found a way back through us. Don't you feel the honor? We are the bridge." I didn't stay to hear more. I ran for the front door, but as I reached the foyer, the air grew so heavy I could barely lift my feet. The walls began to pulse, the wallpaper bubbling and oozing a thick, black fluid that smelled of copper and birth. My water broke then, but it wasn't clear. A dark, viscous liquid soaked through my clothes, staining the floorboards. The pain that followed was unlike any contraction. It felt as though a serrated blade was being twisted inside my pelvis. I collapsed against the front door, clawing at the lock, but the metal was red hot, searing my skin. I looked down at my stomach. The movement was no longer beneath the skin, it was breaking the skin. A small, jagged slit appeared near my hip, and through it I saw a pale, lidless eye peering out at me. It blinked, the pupil a vertical slit of pure malice. "Not here," I wheezed, my vision blurring. "Not like this." The woman from the nursery appeared at the top of the stairs. She didn't walk down. She glided, her body twisting in ways that defied human anatomy. Behind her, Marcus followed, his face now a mask of raw muscle, his eyes glowing with a feverish yellow light. They weren't coming to help me. They were coming to harvest. I managed to drag myself into the kitchen, reaching for a knife on the counter, not for them, but for the thing inside me. I was ready to end it all before that creature drew its first breath. But as my fingers closed around the handle, my own hand betrayed me. My arm locked, moving against my will, and I watched in horror as I pointed the blade at my own throat. Inside my womb, the wet, clicking laugh returned, louder and clearer than ever. "Not yet, Mother," the voice inside me hissed. "We need you alive for the feast." The knife pressed against my throat with a cold, terrifying precision. My own muscles were tensed, locked in a battle against a will that wasn't mine. Every time I tried to drop the blade, a sharp, electric jolt shot from my womb through my nervous system, forcing my grip to tighten. I was a passenger in my own body, a spectator to my own potential end. Marcus and the veiled woman stood at the entrance of the kitchen. They didn't move. They just watched with a predatory patience. Marcus's face was almost unrecognizable now, the skin sloughing off in wet clumps, exposing the raw, red machinery of his jaw. He looked less like my husband and more like a biological sculpture of grief. "The feast requires a vessel that is willing," Marcus croaked, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "Drop the knife, Elena. Accept the gift." The pain in my abdomen shifted from a dull roar to a sharp, tearing sensation. I looked down and saw my maternity shirt shredding. The lidless eye I had seen before was now joined by a second one. They stared up at me from the jagged opening in my side. The creature wasn't just growing, it was unfolding. It was using my body as a cocoon, and the metamorphosis was reaching its peak. Suddenly, the lights in the kitchen began to flicker and pop, plunging us into a strobe-like nightmare. In the flashes of light, I saw the woman from the nursery standing inches from me. Her breath smelled of ancient dust and stagnant water. She reached out a skeletal hand and touched my stomach. Instead of a scream, a sound of pure, melodic harmony erupted from my throat, a sound I didn't produce. It was a lullaby, but the notes were wrong, vibrating at a frequency that made the glassware in the cupboard shatter. The vibration shattered the hold the entity had on my arm. The knife clattered to the floor. I didn't wait. I lunged for the back door, the one leading to the small, dark alleyway. I burst through the wood, my body screaming in protest with every step. The night air was cold, but it felt like fire against my feverish skin. I stumbled through the darkness, tripping over trash and debris, my hands instinctively clutching the gaping wound in my side to keep my insides from spilling out. I reached the end of the alley and collapsed against a brick wall. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just the oppressive silence of a city that had turned its back on me. I looked back at the apartment. The windows were glowing with a sickening, rhythmic amber light, as if the building itself were breathing. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, expecting Marcus, but it was Mrs. Holloway. Her face was grim, her clothes torn. "It's too late to run, Elena," she whispered, her eyes full of pity. "The umbilical cord isn't just made of flesh. It's made of the house's history. You can't leave because you are no longer just Elena. You are the doorway." As she spoke, I felt a horrific pressure behind my eyes. My vision began to split. I saw the street, but I also saw the nursery. I saw Mrs. Holloway, but I also saw the eyeless woman standing right behind her, mimicking her movements. The creature inside me let out a piercing cry, not a cry of a baby, but the screech of a hawk. My skin began to glow with that same amber light. The birth wasn't coming. The emergence was. The amber glow emanating from my skin grew blinding, pulsing in sync with a heartbeat that shook the very ground beneath my feet. Mrs. Holloway's face began to melt, her features sliding away like hot wax to reveal the same hollow-eyed entity that had haunted the nursery. There was no escape. There was no street. I was still in the house. The alleyway had been a final, cruel hallucination. I was back in the nursery, pinned to the center of the salt circle. Marcus stood over me, holding a rusted ritual blade. His face was gone now, only a skull remained, wrapped in the thin, translucent film of his former self. "The bridge is complete," he hissed. The tearing sensation in my abdomen reached its climax. I felt my ribcage snap outward, the bones cracking like dry kindling. I didn't scream. My lungs had already been crushed by the upward expansion of the thing inside me. I watched, paralyzed, as my own skin peeled back like a ripening fruit. Out of the wreckage of my torso, the creature finally emerged. It wasn't a baby. It was a pale, multi-limbed monstrosity with a head shaped like an inverted pyramid. It had no mouth, yet the air was filled with the sound of 1,000 crying infants. Its skin was wet, covered in the black, viscous fluid that had replaced my blood. The creature reached out with a long, spindly arm and touched Marcus. Upon contact, his body didn't just die, it dissolved. His essence being sucked into the creature's pores until nothing was left but his empty clothes on the floor. Then, it turned its lidless eyes toward me. I was nothing more than a hollowed-out shell now, a heap of meat and shattered bone kept alive by the house's dark energy. It leaned down, its cold, wet shadow falling over my face. I felt its spindly fingers slide into my mouth, reaching deep into my throat. "Thank you for the flesh, Mother," it whispered directly into my brain. "Now, let us find a father for the next one." My vision didn't go black. Instead, I felt my consciousness being pulled into the creature, trapped in a corner of its twisted mind. I watched through its eyes as it walked toward the window. I saw my own reflection in the glass, or what was left of it. I was no longer Elena. I was a distorted, pregnant shadow standing behind the creature, destined to haunt this house, waiting for the next young couple to walk through the door. The last thing I felt was the hunger, a ravenous, eternal craving for raw meat and human souls. The cycle of the void never truly ends, and some houses never stop feeding. If this story left you looking over your shoulder, make sure to subscribe for more extremely horrible tales. Like this video if you're brave enough, and comment the doorway below to let me know you made it to the end. Stay safe if you can.